In every direction the ancients looked, they found the same mystery waiting beyond the wind, a land where the sun never set, and the gods still walked beside men. They called it Hyperborea. The Greeks spoke of its endless daylight. The Norse called it the roof of the world. Others said it was swallowed by ice, sealed beneath silence, its cities asleep under the aurora's glow. For thousands of years, poets, philosophers, and explorers have searched for this hidden north, not to find it, but to remember it. Tonight, we follow their quiet trail through forgotten maps, through myths that sound like memories, through light that moves but never fades. So lie back, breathe slow, and listen as we return to the land beyond the north wind. The land beyond the north wind. In the farthest reaches of ancient geography, beyond the mountains that bordered known civilization, there was said to exist a land where winter never truly died, yet life flourished under a strange and gentle sun. The Greeks called it Hyperborea, beyond Boreas, the north wind. It appeared in the oldest writings of Herodotus, Hesiod, and Pindar, who described a place untouched by decay, disease, or war. There, the air was clear, the days long, and the people said to live for 1,000 years, singing hymns to Apollo. No one had seen it. No one could say where it truly was. Yet for thousands of years, maps, myths, and explorers kept searching for it, convinced it was not fiction, but memory. In the 5th century BCE, Herodotus wrote that the Hyperboreans lived beyond the land of the Scythians, somewhere past the Riphean Mountains, a vague range said to cut across the northern world. Later, Roman geographers placed these mountains near the Urals, or even the Carpathians. Others said Hyperborea was an island at the top of the world, encircled by an endless sea of ice. Greek poets treated it not as heaven, but as geography, a hidden zone of earth, accessible only to the gods. Pindar called it the land of perfect happiness, while Diodorus Siculus wrote that Apollo visited it once every 19 years, when the stars aligned in his sacred cycle. The god's chariot was said to vanish into the polar light, returning from a realm no mortal could reach. By the time of the Roman Empire, Hyperborea had already drifted from belief into speculation. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder mentioned it in Natural History, noting that the sun there rose only once a year and set once, giving a single day and night that each lasted 6 months. It was not fantasy to him, it was astronomy. He reasoned that if people could live near the equator, perhaps they could also live at the top of the earth, beneath a sun that circled the horizon. This idea lingered. When medieval scholars rediscovered Greek texts, Hyperborea was redrawn again and again, sometimes above the Arctic Circle, sometimes near Greenland, sometimes as a vanished continent swallowed by the polar sea. In 1531, a cartographer named Gerardus Mercator published a world map unlike any before it. At the North Pole, he drew a circular island divided into 4 quadrants by vast rivers, all flowing into a black whirlpool. At the centre, the magnetic mountain known as Rups Nigra. Around it, he placed 4 surrounding lands, populated by ancient peoples who lived in balance with the elements. On the outer ring, he labelled it simply Hyperborea. The map was based on older fragments, including accounts said to come from a lost monk named Jacobus Noyen, who claimed to have read a Norwegian chronicle describing an expedition to the pole around the year 1360. Mercator's letter to Queen Elizabeth's advisor, John Dee, mentions this in detail. He wrote that the 4 rivers flow with such force towards the centre that no ship can return once drawn in. This magnetic centre, he said, explained why compasses pointed north. To him, Hyperborea was real geography, hidden beneath ice and storm. John Dee, philosopher, mathematician, and advisor to the crown, took this seriously. He considered it part of the lost antediluvian world that once connected Europe to the divine. Dee's own maps and journals, now held in British archives, speak of polar doors openings to an inner realm once visited by gods and later sealed by ice. In the 18th century, as Arctic expeditions began in earnest, the myth gained new life. Explorers like Vitus Bering and James Cook recorded reports of strange warmth in northern waters patches where ice melted even in the dead of winter. In 1823, the English explorer William Scoresby documented sightings of birds migrating farther north than anyone thought possible, suggesting hidden lands beyond known maps. These details revived old whispers of Hyperborea. If there were green valleys and mild winds beyond the Arctic Circle, perhaps the ancient poets had not lied. Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society in the late 19th century, wove the myth into a vast cosmology. She claimed that Hyperborea was not merely a place, but the home of the second root race, beings of immense height and spiritual light, who predated humanity and lived when the poles had not yet frozen. She said their descendants built the first temples in Lemuria and Atlantis, carrying fragments of lost celestial wisdom. Her writings from the Secret Doctrine in 1888 described how the sun shone cold yet bright, and the atmosphere glowed with perpetual dawn. Scientists dismissed it as mysticism, but the imagery stayed. During the early 20th century, Hyperborea took a new shape. German occult societies like the Thule Group adopted the myth, interpreting it as the cradle of an ancient Aryan civilization that had retreated beneath the ice. They spoke of subterranean cities under the pole, and of a great migration southward as the climate changed. Although twisted by ideology, their obsession kept the legend alive in a darker form. Expeditions to Tibet, the Himalayas, and the Arctic were organized to find physical traces. None succeeded, but their reports, often filled with strange coordinates and coded notes, blurred the line between exploration and ritual. Modern geology, too, has its quiet mysteries. Satellite imagery of the Arctic Ocean has revealed circular formations beneath the ice shelf near the Lomonosov Ridge structures some have speculated could match the descriptions of Mercator's polar island. In 2006, Russian scientists from the Arctica expedition lowered submersibles into the deep trench near the North Pole and found thermal anomalies that did not match surrounding regions. They recorded readings of mild water temperatures in isolated pockets, possibly due to geothermal vents. These findings reignited the question: was there once a habitable region now buried under thousands of years of permafrost? Even the myths of indigenous Arctic peoples preserve fragments that sound like echoes. The Yakut speak of a warm land of spirits beyond the northern sea, reached only in dreams. The Sami legends tell of Saivo, a mirrored world beneath frozen lakes, inhabited by luminous beings who guide the souls of the dead. Inuit oral traditions mention Kivitok, those who walk away toward the northern light, never returning, their bodies turning to brightness as they vanish into the horizon. Though separated by continents and centuries, these accounts describe the same direction north into the eternal dawn. The northern lights themselves became part of this mythology. To ancient eyes, the aurora was the bridge between the human and the divine. Greek poets saw Apollo's chariot returning home. Norse skalds saw the armor of the Valkyries shimmering over the world. Siberian shamans believed the lights were the breath of the gods moving through the sky, and that when one stood in silence beneath them, the air carried whispers of another realm. No single civilization ever found Hyperborea. Yet it endured in maps, languages, and dreams as though it had once existed. A land without war, beyond time, at the top of the earth, always waiting for someone to remember its coordinates. The frozen dawn. Long before recorded history, when ice sheets still covered much of the northern hemisphere, the Earth's axis was not where it stands today. Geological evidence suggests that the poles have shifted several times across deep time, a phenomenon known as true polar wander. The crust of the planet, floating on molten layers beneath, can move slightly, altering the orientation of land and sea. Some researchers believe that what is now the Arctic was once a milder zone, covered in forests and rivers rather than ice. Fossils of temperate plants and animals found on the islands of Svalbard, Ellesmere, and even Greenland suggest that the far north once basked in a gentler climate. In the 19th century, Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen recorded strange phenomena during his Arctic expeditions. In 1895, aboard his ship Fram, Nansen wrote in his diary about warm currents beneath the ice and birds flying north into what seemed an empty horizon. He noted, "There must be land beyond this sea, or at least open water that does not freeze." His words echoed older speculation that a lost continent lay hidden under the polar cap, a remnant of an age when the poles were warm. Geologists today know that the Arctic was once green. Sediment cores taken from beneath the polar ocean in 2004 revealed pollen, leaf fragments, and freshwater diatoms, signs that 50 million years ago, during the Eocene epoch, tropical plants grew where glaciers now stand. The temperature then was mild, with palm trees and alligators inhabiting northern region. The cause was the greenhouse climate of that period, when carbon dioxide levels were several times higher than today. Yet older myths of Hyperborea may preserve a human memory of a more recent warmth, one existing near the end of the last ice age, between 12,000 and 9,000 BCE, when rapid melting reshaped continents and sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. Across many ancient traditions, this sudden shift appears as a flood, a great wind, or a dawn that froze. The Greeks described a northern paradise swallowed by cold. The Norse spoke of a time when the sun turned black and Fimbulwinter began. In Vedic texts, the dawn goddess Ushas was said to have hidden her light behind the mountains of snow. Each story points to a period of change when a once habitable region turned to ice. Modern climatology traces this to an event called the Younger Dryas, around 10,800 BCE. It was a rapid return to glacial conditions after centuries of warming. Ice cores from Greenland show that within a few decades, average temperatures dropped sharply and large regions of the northern hemisphere froze again. Some researchers theorize that a comet impact or sudden freshwater release disrupted ocean currents, plunging the planet back into cold. To those living near the edges of the ice, such an event would have seemed like the world itself had tilted a golden land swallowed by frost. In Siberia, mammoth carcasses found frozen in permafrost appear to have died suddenly, with undigested plants still in their mouths. Their preservation hints at a rapid freeze rather than gradual cooling. Legends among the Yakut and Evenki peoples tell of a sky fire that came before the Great Cold, a flash that darkened the sun. Some researchers link these memories to the same event that ended the Paleolithic warmth. On a global scale, coastlines changed dramatically. Continental shelves were flooded, and low-lying plains vanished beneath the sea. One of these submerged regions, the so-called Arctic Basin land, is hypothesized to have been above water before 10,000 BCE. If so, the mountains of what are now Franz Josef Land and Severnaya Zemlya could have formed its highest peaks islands of an older continent now buried beneath ice. For those who once lived there, the encroaching cold would have driven migration southward, carrying with them myths of a lost homeland that glowed under a half-sun. Archaeological fragments from the northern regions of Eurasia add small pieces to this puzzle. Tools found on the Yana River in Siberia, dated to about 32,000 years ago, indicate that humans occupied the Arctic during one of its mild phases. They hunted bison, reindeer, and mammoth in tundra grasslands. These early people were adapted to extreme conditions, yet their survival so far north suggests a climate less severe than today. The discovery of worked mammoth ivory beads and decorative carvings hints at a culture that saw the North not as exile, but as home. The shift from warmth to ice, then, was not only geological. It was cultural, mythological, and deeply remembered. Myths of a shining north, of lands where the sun circled without setting, may descend from these human experiences, fragments of memory passed through generations. When Greek sailors heard stories from Scythian traders or northern tribes, they could have reinterpreted those memories as tales of a divine race living beyond the wind. Over time, the reality of an ancient Arctic civilization blurred into legend. In 1909, the Arctic explorer Frederick Cook wrote about an ancient light seen while crossing the polar plateau, a constant glow beneath the horizon, even at midnight. He described it as a dull golden band that never fades. To him, it was an optical illusion caused by atmospheric refraction, but his words stirred old associations. Ancient poets had described Hyperborea as a land where the sun never truly set a place of perpetual twilight. Science and myth, separated by centuries, were describing the same phenomenon from different languages. There are geological signs that the Earth's tilt may have changed slightly around the same time as these myths were forming. Studies of sediment layers in Arctic lakes suggest sudden realignment in glacial meltwater patterns. Some fringe researchers, such as Charles Hapgood in the mid-20th century, proposed a crustal displacement theory that Earth's outer shell can shift dramatically, moving entire continents to new latitudes. Though not accepted by mainstream geology, the idea fascinated thinkers like Albert Einstein, who wrote a cautious preface to Hapgood's work in 1953, acknowledging that rapid shifts might have occurred in prehistoric times. If such a movement displaced the poles, regions once temperate could have been thrust into cold almost overnight. Within myth, this would appear as the fall of a golden age. In Hesiod's works and days, the first humans lived in peace during the reign of Kronos, an age of endless spring, before toil, before winter. When that time ended, the world tilted, and men were scattered. Later poets spoke of a great migration from north to south, following the retreat of warmth. Among the Hyperboreans, this was remembered not as exile, but as continuity, carrying the songs of the dawn wherever they went. In recent decades, climatologists studying ice cores have noted faint traces of atmospheric dust layers coinciding with ancient myths of sudden cold. They indicate massive volcanic eruptions, likely in Iceland or Alaska, that darkened the skies across hemispheres. Ancient storytellers may have interpreted these dim periods as the sun's retreat. In their language, dawn froze. In ours, volcanic aerosols reflected sunlight. Both describe the same event, the sudden quieting of light. The earth remembers this frozen dawn in its layers pollen, replaced by silt, forests replaced by tundra. But the human imagination remembers it differently, not as extinction, but as distance. The memory of a northern world that once breathed warmth before the long winter came. The builders of the cold Sunday, archaeologists have long wondered how far north human culture once reached before the great ice returned. Scattered evidence suggests that small groups ventured into territories now buried under snow, building temporary dwellings, carving ivory tools, and leaving behind symbols that seem to point toward the sun. These traces, faint and rare, are the last footprints of a people who might have lived near the roof of the world, perhaps the same who inspired the ancient Greek image of Hyperborea. On the banks of the Yana River, in northeastern Siberia, not far from the Laptev Sea, excavations have revealed one of the oldest Arctic settlements ever found. Radiocarbon dating places it around 32,000 years ago, long before the peak of the last ice age. There, researchers found mammoth bones arranged in circular foundations, likely the remains of huts covered in hides. Flint blades, spear points, and carved ivory beads were also discovered. The people who made them hunted reindeer and bison, and they shaped their tools with skill equal to those of Ice Age Europe. In the quiet record of the earth, they stand as the first known builders of the cold sun, those who lived in light that barely rose and yet endured. Further west, along the Lena and Ob rivers, sites like Mamontavaya Kuria show a similar pattern. Fragments of bone-bearing human-made marks suggest that people reached these latitudes nearly 40,000 years ago. They would have seen a world of long dusk where the sun's path never climbed high above the horizon. Yet instead of fleeing south, they adapted building dwellings low to the ground, using mammoth tusks as arches and insulating walls with layers of moss and snow. Archaeologists have found evidence of hearths, places of warmth that burned continuously through months of night. In one, traces of hematite powder were found mixed with ash, perhaps used as pigment or ritual offering. Anthropologists studying Arctic myths note that many indigenous peoples remember a first age when the sun was closer to the earth. Among the Chukchi and Evenki, stories speak of a time when daylight lasted for months and humans could talk directly to the stars. In one tale, the ancestors of men lived side by side with glowing beings who taught them to build shelters of ivory and stone. When the world grew colder, those beings walked north and disappeared into the horizon. To those who remained, that departure marked the beginning of human time, an echo of the Greek story that the gods once lived among the Hyperboreans before withdrawing to the sky. Across the northern steppe, ancient cultures left symbols that seem to trace the sun's path. At sites near Lake Baikal, carved discs and bone plaques depict concentric circles with rays simple but deliberate, perhaps marking the movement of the sun through long twilight seasons. In one burial from the Yana complex, a small pendant carved from ivory bears a spiral pattern identical to solar motifs found thousands of kilometers away in Europe's Gravettian caves. These repeating forms, spread over such vast distances, suggest a shared awareness of the sun as more than light as a presence worth recording, perhaps even worshipping. The people of the cold sun were not isolated. Genetic evidence from ancient DNA shows that populations living in Arctic Siberia contributed to the ancestry of both early Europeans and the first Americans. Around 20,000 years ago, as glaciers thickened, groups from these northern plains began to move eastward, crossing the now submerged land of Beringia. It is believed that through this corridor, humans eventually reached the Americas. Some researchers speculate that memories of a lost homeland to the north may have survived that migration, appearing later as myths of shining islands, skyborn ancestors, or lands where the sun never set. In northern mythology, the builder motif often returns. The Sami of Scandinavia speak of satyr stones, sacred markers erected by the first dwellers who followed the reindeer under the long light. These stones were aligned with the sun at midsummer, standing as guides through endless day. In Yakut legends, the elder brothers of ice are described as tall figures who built fortresses of bone and vanished before the great freeze. Though clearly mythic, these stories share a pattern. Construction, withdrawal, and silence, the same pattern attributed to Hyperborea. When modern explorers entered these regions in the 18th and 19th centuries, they often encountered unusual ruins, stone circles, raised mounds, and cairns of uncertain origin. On the Kola Peninsula, near the White Sea, there stands a megalithic structure known as the Russian Stonehenge, or Seda. Its purpose remains unknown, but it aligns closely with the rising sun at the summer solstice. Archaeologist Alexander Gurvich noted in 1927 that local Sami traditions claimed it was built by people who came before snow ruled the mountains. Similar sites exist across northern Finland and Karelia, some dating to 3000 BCE. Each faces the same direction toward the first sunrise after winter's end. To early thinkers like Gerardus Mercator and John Dee, these patterns supported the belief that a great civilization once inhabited the north before ice consumed it. Dee wrote in his Marginalia that those who built in silence left no tombs, for they knew return. This idea that Hyperborea's builders vanished not in death, but in retreat, became a recurring theme in later esoteric writings. Helena Blavatsky echoed it in The Secret Doctrine, suggesting that the polar lords withdrew beneath the earth when the axis shifted, preserving their knowledge in crystalline cities far below the ice. Science does not confirm such visions, yet geology preserves an odd kind of parallel. Beneath the Arctic ice lie mountain ranges the Lomonosov and Alpha ridges separated by deep trenches and fault lines. Modern sonar mapping reveals symmetrical patterns along these ridges, almost like the outlines of an ancient valley. Some researchers, such as Dr. Valery Demin in the early 2000s, proposed that these submerged formations could once have supported human life when sea levels were lower. His theory was met with skepticism, but it revived interest in the possibility that the Arctic basin had once been above water. Artifacts found along the Ob and Yenisei rivers, including flint tools and worked antler, indicate a continuous human presence in northern Siberia, even during the coldest millennia. These objects, though small, point to resilience. They also suggest a knowledge of cycles of how to follow light and warmth across seasons. The builders of the cold sun were not gods, but observers. They measured the world through movement and adaptation. To them, the shifting sun was a teacher, its low arc a signal of time itself, bending. In later myth, this reverence for the cold light became divine. The Greeks transformed it into Apollo's northern sanctuary. The Norse saw it as the forge of the Aesir. To the Yakut and Sami, it was simply the threshold, the place where breath met frost, and where life could continue by listening to the sun even when it barely appeared. Their works, scattered and half-buried, remain as quiet testimony. Bone circles beneath the tundra, aligned stones facing the dawn, ivory pendants shaped like the slow-turning disk of light. The northern silence still holds them under layers of snow, as if waiting for another thaw. The silent axis. In every ancient cosmology, the sky was not an emptiness, it was a mechanism. The early observers who watched the stars from stone circles, tundra clearings, and coastal horizons saw patterns move with such patience that centuries passed before the change could be noticed. They believed the world itself was breathing. What we now call axial precession, the slow wobble of Earth's rotation over roughly 26,000 years, was once interpreted as a shift of heaven and the fall of old ages. To them, Hyperborea may not have vanished through destruction, but through the quiet turning of that cosmic axis. The Babylonians were among the first to record the movement of the pole star. Tablets from around 1800 BCE mention the star Thuban in the constellation Draco as the pivot of the sky, the point about which all stars revolved. Yet thousands of years later, that role belonged to Polaris. This drift, imperceptible in a lifetime, would have given the illusion that the heavens were slowly tilting. For those who lived close to the Arctic, where the sun itself circled low along the horizon, such changes could mark the difference between light and darkness, warmth and endless winter. If the axis moved even slightly, the climate of the far north could shift enough to erase entire landscapes. Greek philosophers inherited these ideas through older sources. The historian Diodorus Siculus wrote in the 1st century BCE that the Hyperboreans lived beneath the star which turns around the pole. That phrasing, though poetic, may preserve a memory of this slow, celestial change. When the star's position altered, so too did the imagined home of the northern gods. It moved invisibly through time, carried by the heavens themselves. Egyptian priests also measured these cycles. The orientation of temples at Karnak and Dendera shows awareness of precession long before it was named. The axis of the Great Pyramid of Giza aligned with the northern stars around 2000, 500 BCE, pointed directly toward Thuban. By 1000 BCE, that alignment had already drifted. What had once been a perfect orientation toward the cosmic center was now slightly off, as if the universe had turned away. For cultures that saw symmetry as sacred, such a shift was not a calculation, it was an omen. Later, in Hellenistic times, Hipparchus of Nicaea noticed that star catalogues from centuries earlier no longer matched the sky. Around 130 BCE, he deduced that the equinoxes themselves were moving backward through the zodiac, the first recorded discovery of precession. To him, the heavens were rotating slowly, like a vast wheel. If the axis moved, so too did the places under it. In this framework, Hyperborea could have been a land once perfectly aligned with the celestial pole, a world where the gods and stars shared the same center. When the axis turned, that harmony ended. Ancient India held a similar concept. In Vedic texts, the term Dhruva described the fixed star around which all others revolved. Its position, though constant to the eye, was said to change with the ages. The Surya Siddhanta, a Sanskrit astronomical treatise compiled around 400 CE, calculates precession with remarkable precision, about 50 arcseconds per year, close to modern values. The text explains that when the pole shifts, new stars become guardians of the north. Myths of lost northern lands, of gods who withdrew beyond the wind, may have encoded this transition in symbolic language. In northern Europe, megalithic monuments track the same awareness. The stones at Callanish in Scotland, set around 2900 BCE, align with the setting of the moon at its extreme northern point, an event that repeats only every 6 years. Over millennia, the position of that rising changed slightly, enough that later generations had to adjust their alignments. To those who built and rebuilt these circles, the heavens were not still. They were a shifting map, and humanity's role was to mark the movement. The myth of Hyperborea's disappearance could easily have been the memory of such a celestial drift, a place that once lay under the sacred pole, now displaced as the earth turned in silence. When scholars of the Renaissance revisited these ideas, they began linking ancient myths to astronomical motion. In 1569, the Italian philosopher Giordano Bruno wrote that worlds rise and fall as the heavens incline. He speculated that ancient paradises might be geological or axial relics regions once favoured by the sun, later condemned to frost. A century later, in 1686, the French astronomer Bernard Le Bovier de Fontenelle proposed that the climates of the poles were once mild, owing to shifts in Earth's position. These were early attempts to translate myth into mechanics. Among indigenous Arctic peoples, however, the change of sky remained a living experience. Inuit oral traditions describe how the stars walk over time, a phenomenon they observed directly during the long winters when the same constellations hover for months. The disappearance of certain stars from old stories corresponds to known precessional shifts. One legend from Baffin Island speaks of a hunter who lost his way because the Great Bear no longer pointed home. That Great Bear was Ursa Major, the constellation surrounding the pole star, its orientation slowly altering as centuries passed. The precession of the axis also explains why the North Star changes every few thousand years. Around 2800 BCE, Thuban was the pole star. Around 14,000 CE, Vega will take its place. To early civilizations, these changes appeared as epochs, cosmic ages governed by different deities. In the esoteric tradition that later emerged from theosophy and Hermetic writings, each pole corresponded to a race or world age. Hyperborea, they said, belonged to the time of Thuban, when the pole star was in Draco the dragon. Its fall marked the shift from divine alignment to human exile. Even within modern science, the link between axial motion and climate remains profound. Ice core data show that precessional cycles influence glaciation patterns by altering the distribution of sunlight across latitudes. The great ice ages, repeating every tens of thousands of years, are tied to these celestial rhythms. In a sense, the heavens do write upon the earth, reshaping coastlines, forests, and the migration of species. If Hyperborea was ever real, it would have been one of those transient climates, a garden balanced upon the tilt of the world. Renaissance cartographers tried to capture this relationship in their designs. Mercator's polar maps often placed circular lines around the magnetic pole, suggesting movement. His notes mention the shifting of the axis, which changes the nature of lands. John Dee later speculated that this motion was part of a divine mechanism, a clock set by the Creator. To him, the lost northern land symbolized the hidden gear within that clock, turning silently as ages passed. In recent centuries, polar explorers continued to encounter odd variations in compass readings, deviations caused by the wandering magnetic pole, itself slowly drifting across the Arctic. Early 20th century maps show it near Boothia Peninsula in Canada. By 2001, it had moved towards Siberia. Though magnetic rather than axial, this wandering adds another layer to the myth's endurance, the sense that the true north itself refuses to stay still. In every culture, the north held a peculiar stillness, the point where movement ceased, where heaven touched the earth. When that point began to move, even imperceptibly, something sacred seemed to slip away. The axis, once silent and centered, had shifted. The world beneath it would follow. The magnetic mountain. In the oldest maps of the northern world, at the very center of the pole, there stood a black mountain. It was drawn tall and circular, surrounded by 4 great rivers flowing inward toward its base. Medieval mapmakers called it Rups Nigra, the Black Rock. It appeared on Gerardus Mercator's 1569 world map, and again in his 1595 polar chart, where it occupied the exact center of the Arctic Ocean. Around it, Mercator drew 4 islands, divided by currents that spiraled into a vortex. From that vortex, he wrote, "The sea rushes continually to the north, and is swallowed as though into the earth." This mountain was more than a cartographic symbol. It represented a convergence of ancient beliefs about magnetism, navigation, and divine geography. Sailors in the Middle Ages believed their compasses pointed north because of a hidden lodestone, a colossal magnetic stone that drew the needle's iron. The Inventio Fortunata, a lost 14th century travel account said to have been written by a Franciscan monk from Oxford, was the first to mention it. Only fragments of this text survive, preserved in letters and notes quoted by later geographers. According to these, the monk claimed to have reached the northern islands beyond the ice around the year 1360. There, he described a dark rock, 33 leagues in circumference, rising straight from the sea at the world's navel. Gerardus Mercator referred to this lost book in correspondence with Queen Elizabeth's advisor, John Dee, in 1577. In his letter, still preserved in Latin, Mercator wrote, "In the midst of the 4 countries is a whirlpool, into which 4 indraughts of the sea converge. There stands a rock, of magnetic nature, towering high, whose virtue is such that it draws iron." To Dee, who was both mathematician and mystic, this detail had significance beyond geography. He believed the Earth's magnetic power was the physical expression of divine order, a force that tied the heavens to the world's structure. The mountain at the pole, then, was not only a natural wonder, it was the axis mundi, the center of creation. Later, maps reproduced this image faithfully. The Dutch cartographer Henricus Hondius copied Mercator's design in 1608, labeling the mountain Rups Nigra et Altissima. The rivers radiating from it were named after the cardinal directions, forming a perfect cross. Each flowed into one of 4 islands, which Mercator claimed were inhabited by ancient peoples descended from lost tribes. To the northwestern island he assigned the Pygmy, a diminutive race mentioned by Pliny. To the northeastern he placed giants. The symbolism was clear. Hyperborea, if it existed, was built around a centre of power, magnetic and eternal. For centuries, no sailor ever confirmed or denied the mountain's existence. The Arctic seas were largely unknown. Ice, fog, and shifting compass readings made navigation nearly impossible. Early explorers who tried to find the pole, like the Englishman Martin Frobisher in 1578 or Henry Hudson in 1609, described the compass behaving strangely, its needle trembling or reversing direction. They blamed storms or unseen forces, but to those familiar with Mercator's writings, these were signs of the mountain's influence. The closer one came to it, they believed, the stronger its pull. In 1659, a Jesuit scholar named Athanasius Kircher published Mundus Subterraneus, a vast encyclopedia of hidden earthly structures. In it, he reproduced the story of Rups Nigra, describing it as a black lodestone mountain that governs the circulation of the world's waters and magnetism. Kircher added his own interpretation, that the mountain sat above a network of channels connecting the inner and outer seas, the arteries of the planet. His cross-section drawings show whirlpools draining into a hollow earth illuminated by a central fire. The myth of the magnetic pole had merged with the new fascination for natural magnetism and the unseen. When Edmund Halley, in 1692, proposed that Earth might consist of concentric shells capable of supporting life, he cited magnetic irregularities as evidence. His hollow Earth model, though scientific in intent, echoed the same geometry Mercator drew a century earlier. Halley's inner worlds, connected by polar openings, were a rationalized echo of the Hyperborean mountain and its vortex. What had once been sacred became a hypothesis of physics. As Arctic exploration continued, the myth retreated but never vanished. In 1818, the British Admiralty launched its first official polar expeditions. Captain John Ross, commanding Isabella and Alexander, sailed into Baffin Bay, searching for a passage to the pole. His crew reported seeing strange red snow, a phenomenon caused by algae and compasses that fluctuated wildly near Lancaster Sound. Ross noted, "The magnetic inclination increased to 90 degrees, and the needle stood vertical." He concluded they were near the magnetic pole, though no mountain was in sight. Yet even as science replaced legend, the shape of that unseen centre persisted in the imagination. By 1831, James Clark Ross located the magnetic pole on the Boothia Peninsula in Canada. He found no mountain, only barren rock and frozen sea. Still, his journals describe a curious silence at the moment of discovery, the compass motionless, the air without wind. To those who read his account later, that silence felt symbolic, as if the earth itself withheld its secret. Even today, the idea of a magnetic core at the pole has not disappeared. In esoteric writings of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Rups Nigra became the entrance to inner realms. Helena Blavatsky called it the seat of the Lords of the North. William Scott Elliott, in his 1904 work, The Story of Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria, described a crown of black crystal at the center of the Arctic Sea, reflecting the aurora like a mirror. These images had no basis in science, but they mirrored an enduring intuition that the world has a physical heart, hidden in the farthest cold. Modern magnetic studies have shown that the magnetic pole is not fixed but wanders, moving several miles each year. In 1904, it lay near Boothia. By 2001, it had crossed the Arctic Ocean towards Siberia. The concept of a stationary mountain at the world's center may have originated from early navigators attempting to reconcile these shifts. To them, the compass needle's constant change suggested a moving soul, something living beneath the ice. In the quiet of the Arctic night, under the pale shimmer of aurora, the horizon often glows faintly, a curvature of light caused by atmospheric refraction. To those who once believed in the black rock, that glow could have been the reflection of its dark face, hidden beyond sight. It became the visual signature of a mystery the earth still holds. That somewhere beneath the frozen sea, at the meeting point of all directions, lies the unseen center of the world, the four rivers of the north. Every civilization that dreamed of the polar world imagined it divided not as a single mass of land, but as a pattern, a wheel of continents and waters converging toward a hidden center. On the medieval maps that placed Rupes Nigra at the top of the earth, four vast rivers flowed inward from the edges of the known seas. They met in a central whirlpool beneath the Black Mountain, their currents endlessly circling before vanishing underground. The image was strange, symmetrical, and persistent. It appeared in the accounts of early geographers, echoed in mythic poetry, and even reflected faintly in the patterns of real Arctic tides. The oldest description of these four rivers comes from the Inventio Fortunata, the same lost manuscript that spoke of the Black Mountain. Its fragments describe the Arctic as being split into four kingdoms, each divided by great gulfs of water running toward the center. Gerardus Mercator copied this layout directly into his map of 1595, labeling the rivers with Latin inscriptions that translated simply as northern channels. He said they flowed with such force that no ship could resist their pull. The four lands they divided were equal in size, like the quarters of a circle, a geometric perfection that to medieval thinkers reflected divine order. One early interpretation came from the Norse. In their cosmology, the world was encircled by the ocean, and at its center rose Yggdrasil, the world tree, whose roots reached into wells of wisdom and fate. Around it flowed four rivers born from the spring. Fergelmir, their names preserved in the Prose Edda: Svöl, Guntrar, Fjörm, and Slither. These waters fed the oceans of men and gods alike. Some scholars believe that when medieval cartographers read Norse sagas and combined them with Greek geography, the image of the four polar rivers was born rivers encircling the cosmic tree, flowing toward a sacred center rather than away from it. In the Greek imagination, the northern lands beyond Scythia were crossed by deep, cold streams that encircled the earth. Herodotus called them rivers that return upon themselves. Later commentators linked them to the stream of Oceanus, a ring-shaped sea said to flow around all continents. Hyperborea, located beyond the reach of the north wind, was thought to rest upon one of these circular waters, a boundary between mortal and divine geography. To the Greeks, these rivers were not only physical, they marked the transition from the human world into the eternal. Mercator and his contemporaries tried to translate this mythic order into the geometry of maps. The 1595 Septentrionalium Terrarum Descriptio shows each river cutting deeply into the pole from one of the cardinal directions north, south, east, and west. Their convergence forms a cross, at whose heart stands the magnetic mountain. The rivers are labelled Mare Sugenum, Mare Congelatum, Mare Glaciale, and Mare Septentrionale. Between them lie four lands. To the northwest, Mercator wrote, lived a hardy people who feed upon fish and cold winds. To the northeast, he marked the land of the Pygmies. The southeast was left blank, and the southwest bore the Latin words Regio Deserte, the deserted region. The pattern mirrored not only theology, but natural observation. Medieval sailors, noticing the immense tidal flows of the Arctic seas, spoke of waters that rose and fell without wind, as if drawn by a distant breath. The Icelandic Landnámabók mentions currents around Greenland, running toward the north in the summer months. In the 13th century, Norse seafarers who ventured beyond Iceland recorded that the sea draws itself northward, a phrase later repeated in Latin chronicles as mare se attrahit. To minds steeped in myth, such descriptions seem to confirm the existence of those four channels. In the 18th century, with the rise of systematic exploration, the metaphor of the four rivers found a strange echo in science. The oceanographer Matthew Fontaine Maury, studying global currents in the 1,850 seconds, identified four great Arctic streams: the warm Gulf Stream entering from the Atlantic, the cold East Greenland Current flowing southward, the Bering Strait inflow from the Pacific, and the transpolar drift sweeping across the pole. Their paths, when traced on modern charts, form a vast rotating system. To those who compared these to the old maps, the similarity was striking four great movements, circling a central vortex of cold. Yet the myth carried deeper meaning than geography. In Hermetic philosophy, the number 4 symbolized the elements earth, air, fire, and water flowing toward unity at the world's heart. Renaissance scholars like John Dee saw in Mercator's rivers the diagram of cosmic harmony. The central whirlpool became the anima mundi, the soul of the world, drawing all things back to their origin. Dee's marginal notes in his Monas Hieroglyphica refer to the four emanations of motion returning to the northern seat. Though written in the language of alchemy, his vision mirrored the Arctic myth precisely. 4 streams, 1 convergence, perpetual motion. The same geometry appears in non-European traditions. In Siberian cosmology, the shaman's drum often depicts a world divided into 4 quarters, crossed by rivers or paths leading to the pole. Among the Evenki, the north is called Duku, meaning both summit and center. The spirits of the dead were believed to travel along invisible waterways toward a mountain that glowed beneath the aurora. During trance rituals, shamans would trace 4 lines across the drum's surface, each representing a direction and a river. The goal was to reach the center, the navel of the world. Anthropologist Waldemar Jockelson, recording these traditions in 1908, wrote that they were a reflection in mythic form of ancient geographic perception. The rivers also found place in Christian thought. Medieval theologians connected them with the 4 rivers of Eden, Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates, which Genesis describes as flowing from a single source. Commentators such as Isidore of Seville in the 7th century wrote that paradise lies at the summit of the world, where the rivers divide the earth into 4 parts. Though he placed this paradise eastward, later scholars transposed the idea northward, merging Eden and Hyperborea into one hidden realm. In manuscripts from the 12th century, such as the Imago Mundi of Honorius of Autun, the world is shown as a circle divided by 4 streams, all meeting near the pole. The pattern remained identical to that of Mercator's map drawn 400 years later. Even modern observation preserves a trace of the imagery. The polar vortex of vast atmospheric circulation centered on the Arctic spins counterclockwise, drawing air from 4 main branches across the continents. Satellite images of this system, with its curling arms of cloud, resemble the medieval diagrams almost exactly. The ancient symbol, once drawn from imagination, now appears in the motion of air itself. The Earth's circulation follows the same form the mythmakers intuited, not static, but revolving eternally around an unseen center. No explorer has ever found the 4 rivers of Hyperborea. There are only currents, shifting ice, and the endless movement of water beneath frozen seas. Yet the idea of convergence of all directions meeting in one silent place remains. On maps it was drawn as cross and circle. In myth, it became the passage between worlds. In the Arctic, it endures as the rhythm of the ocean's breath, returning north again and again, as if remembering the path home. The sun that never set. Ancient poets wrote of a place where the sun circled endlessly in the sky, never dipping below the horizon. The Greeks called it Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind, where Apollo, god of light, spent his winters among a race untouched by age or sorrow. There, they said, was a sun that did not set, and a sky that glowed softly through the long turning of the year. Though no explorer had ever seen it, the description was consistent across centuries, a region of constant day, quiet, and warmth at the edge of the frozen world. To the early Greeks, this was not metaphor, it was geography. Herodotus wrote around 440 BCE that the Hyperboreans live beyond the land of the north wind, where the sun shines for 6 months. Later, the poet Pindar described their home as a place never touched by snow or storm, where Apollo dances and the breezes are gentle. He did not imagine an underworld or paradise, but a real location somewhere past the mountains of Scythia. What he described, a long day that lasts half the year, corresponds exactly to the polar summer, where above the Arctic Circle the sun circles the sky continuously from late spring to early autumn. The Greek astronomer Pytheas of Massalia was among the first to confirm this phenomenon. Around 320 BCE, he sailed north beyond Britain, perhaps as far as Iceland or Norway. In his lost book on the ocean, known only through later citations, Pytheas wrote of a sea-like jelly, where the air and water mingled in mist, and of a region where the sun never sets and the night is bright as twilight. Though his contemporaries doubted him, modern scholars recognize in his account the Arctic Circle's midnight sun. His observations bridged myth and measurement, showing that the idea of Hyperborea may have originated from sailors who had glimpsed those endless days. In the northern sagas of Scandinavia, the same vision appears. The Norse called the Arctic summer sol aurora, the sun of all days. They believed that far beyond the known seas lay lands where light never faded, inhabited by the Alfar, or Shining Ones. The prose Edda speaks of Gimle, a bright realm south and above the heavens, but the early Icelandic texts also describe Odainsaka, the field of the not dead, a northern paradise of warmth and perpetual dawn. The imagery mirrors the Hyperborean myth so closely that later Christian monks equated the two, placing both at the crown of the world, untouched by sin or decay. Medieval scholars, studying Aristotle's treatise on the heavens, found support for such places in natural law. Aristotle noted that, at the poles, there must be regions where the sun remains above the horizon for half the year. The idea was mathematical. If the earth was spherical, then at its axis the day would lengthen infinitely. His reasoning transformed the myth into cosmology. For the first time, the sun that never set was not supernatural, it was a consequence of geometry. When the Renaissance revived ancient maps, the image of constant light returned to the charts of the north. Mercator, following Pytheas and Ptolemy, marked the polar zone as a land of 6-month day. In his notes he wrote, "There are those who say that at the very pole the sun revolves without setting, giving a perpetual noon." To 16th century Europe, this was not fantasy, but frontier science, the merging of classical accounts with reports from northern voyages. As exploration advanced, these descriptions found their physical truth. In 1596, Willem Barent, sailing along the coast of Novaya Zemlya, witnessed his ship trapped in ice through a winter when the sun vanished for months. When it returned, it circled the horizon, rising higher each day but never setting. His crew recorded in their journal that the day has no end, only light that turns. The experience matched perfectly what the Greeks had imagined, not an eternal summer, but a world where day itself was circular. To the people who lived there, the polar sun was neither divine nor cursed. The Sami of northern Scandinavia called it Bavi, the sun goddess who gives life to reindeer and grass. During midwinter, they hung discs of polished bone on their tents to remind her to return. When the endless day began in spring, they greeted her with songs, marking the renewal of light. Among the Nenets and Chukchi of Siberia, similar rituals survive: fires lit at midnight when the sun still shines, offerings made to the watcher who never sleeps. To them, the Arctic sun was a living rhythm, the slow breathing of the world. Greek writers, interpreting second-hand tales of these northern peoples, transformed that rhythm into perfection. Diodorus Siculus wrote in the 1st century BCE that the Hyperboreans lived in a temperate climate, rich in fruits, and their day is one, which continues for 6 months. Pliny the Elder repeated the claim, adding that the nights are equally long in winter, but their lives are blessed with joy and songs to Apollo. The balance of half-year light and half-year darkness became symbolic, a mirror of cosmic order, where excess and absence are equal. During the Enlightenment, natural philosophers used this same imagery to explain the Arctic's paradox. In 1733, the French geographer Philippe Bouache published his Carte physique des mers, depicting warm and cold currents converging at the pole to sustain open water. He described a mild climate beneath the long sun. Though his theory was wrong, the language he used a hidden warmth. A circle of light carried the ancient tone. Even in scientific prose, the myth of the unsetting sun remained intact. Modern astronomy confirms what the ancients only guessed. At the pole, the sun rises once each year in March and does not set until September. During that half-year, its low orbit paints the sky with constant twilight. The atmosphere scatters light so evenly that shadows vanish, and the world becomes a single colour, pale gold, then silver, then white. To observers there, time dissolves, day and night lose meaning. The Greeks, who measured time by the sun's passage, might well have imagined such a place as timeless itself, the realm of immortals. Even today, scientists stationed at the polar research bases experience what the ancients once called divine stillness. At the Amundsen Scott station, sunlight circles the horizon, never rising high enough to warm the air, yet casting an unbroken glow. During those months, clocks seem irrelevant. Work continues under an unchanging sky, echoing Pythias's words from 23 centuries ago. The air and sea are one, and the light has no shadow. And to stand beneath that sun is to understand how easily myth and nature overlap. The Hyperboreans, if they ever existed, lived under the same slow-turning light, a sun that moved but never left, marking no days, only the endless presence of time itself. The songs of Apollo. In the oldest hymns of Greece, Apollo is not bound to the Mediterranean. He is said to vanish each winter, leaving Delphi and its temple in silence. The priests would close the sanctuary, and the oracle's voice would cease until spring. The poets explained this absence simply. Apollo had gone north, to dwell among the Hyperboreans, a people untouched by disease or sorrow, living in perpetual daylight beyond the mountains of Boreas. The north wind. His return each spring marked the rebirth of the world. This annual journey of the sun god became the rhythm through which the ancients imagined the changing seasons. Pindar, in his 10th Pythian ode, wrote that neither disease nor bitter old age is mixed in their sacred blood. They live without toil or battle beside the blessed gods. He described Apollo playing his lyre there, accompanied by choirs who sang day and night under a clear northern sky. Herodotus, centuries earlier, had mentioned that the Hyperboreans sent offerings to Apollo's shrine at Delphi. Their gifts, sacred wheat wrapped in straw, travelled from tribe to tribe, handed from north to south in an unbroken chain until they reached Greece. To Herodotus, this was not legend, but ritual fact. He recorded it in his histories as proof that the worship of Apollo extended beyond the known world. The offerings themselves, he said, came first to the Scythians, then through Thrace and Dodona, before reaching the island of Delos. There, maidens known as Hyperborean virgins Opis, Hecate, and Loxo were honoured for having first carried them. Delian priests sang that these women had journeyed from the north, across mountains and seas, following the flight of swans. When they died, their graves were built within Apollo's temple, and each year the islanders wove garlands in their memory. The myth fused geography and devotion. The far north was not a frontier but the origin of holiness itself. To the Greeks, Hyperborea represented purity, a land beyond corruption, where Apollo could dwell when the southern world was dark. His departure each winter paralleled the sun's retreat, his return each spring the renewal of life. In this sense, Hyperborea was less a place than a cycle. The philosopher Hecataeus of Abdera, writing in the 4th century BCE, said that the Hyperboreans lived in a region opposite the rising of the sun, where the sun shone for half the year, and where Apollo returns again after his circuit through the heavens. He added that the god's temple there was spherical, adorned with many offerings, and attended by the sons of Boreas. Some have interpreted this as a poetic reference to the shape of the earth, or even to an early awareness of the celestial sphere itself. The image of Apollo's northern temple lingered. Later writers described it as being built of transparent stone glowing from within. Diodorus Siculus, in the 1st century BCE, wrote that, in the island sacred to Apollo, the moon appears very near to the earth, and the god visits it every 19 years. That cycle of 19 years, known as the Metonic cycle, was the period in which the sun and moon's calendars align a precise astronomical rhythm used by Greek priests to regulate sacred festivals. Thus, the myth of Apollo's northern voyage concealed an astronomical truth: the return of light and the harmonization of celestial time. The Roman poet Ovid repeated the tale in Metamorphoses, calling the Hyperboreans a race that knows no winter. For him, Apollo's lyre was their heartbeat. His presence kept their world in perfect balance. The Romans adopted this vision as a symbol of order, the idea that civilization itself was aligned with the sun's movement between worlds. When the Emperor Augustus re-established the cult of Apollo in Rome, he dedicated the temple of Apollo Palatinus to the god who comes from the north. It was a subtle echo of the ancient belief that wisdom and purity flow southward from a land of eternal light. Even after the decline of pagan religion, Apollo's journey to Hyperborea survived in the vocabulary of the learned. Medieval scholars studying Aristotle and Ptolemy accepted that at the pole the sun might stay above the horizon for months. They began to treat Hyperborea not as heaven, but as an unreachable region of the earth. The 12th century writer Honorius of Autun described it as a place of perpetual day where men live in harmony and music, borrowing language directly from Pindar. In the monasteries of northern Europe, the songs of Apollo became a metaphor for the pursuit of knowledge light that never sets, echoing across centuries of darkness. Renaissance thinkers, especially those drawn to Hermetic philosophy, reinterpreted the myth again. To them, Apollo's northern journey symbolized the migration of wisdom from an ancient polar civilization to the southern world after a cataclysm. In the 15th century, the Italian scholar Marsilio Ficino wrote that the rays of the sun, like divine intellect, descend from the Hyperborean heights. Later, in the 17th century, the English mathematician and mystic John Dee saw in Apollo's cycle a hidden correspondence between celestial geometry and human history. He believed that knowledge itself moved like the sun withdrawing and returning through ages of silence. In the 19th century, when theosophical writers revived the legend of Hyperborea, Apollo once again stood at its center. Helena Blavatsky described him as the symbol of the second race, a remnant of divine beings who carried light to early humanity. For her followers, the songs of Apollo were not mere music, but echoes of a lost science, the language of vibration and harmony that once governed nature. They connected this to the northern lights, whose shifting colours they saw as the visual manifestation of those celestial hymns. Under the aurora, they said, the air itself sings a faint electrical sound heard in total stillness, like a memory of the god's lyre. Modern explorers who have wintered near the Arctic Circle often report hearing subtle noises beneath the aurora's glow, soft crackles and whispers caused by electrical discharges in the atmosphere. Though faint, they lend the myth an uncanny realism. The ancients spoke of the music of the spheres, and those who have stood under the northern sky speak of the same impression, soundless music, felt rather than heard. The songs of Apollo may not have been metaphor after all, but an ancient description of the natural symphony that still fills the polar air. In this way, the story of the Hyperborean Apollo became a bridge between myth and measurement, between religion and observation. It preserved the memory of the sun's long arc, the stillness of the Arctic light, and the sense that at the top of the world, music and motion are one. To the Greeks, he was a god returning home. To us, he may have been the first poet of the poles, his lyre strung with the light of an endless day, the bridge of swans. In Greek legend, the north was not separated from the human world by distance alone, but by passage a mysterious route known as the Bridge of Swans. The phrase first appeared in the writings of Pindar and was repeated later by Herodotus, who claimed that the Hyperboreans sent their sacred gifts to Delos by the Way of the Swans. For the ancients, these birds were not mere symbols. They were the messengers of Apollo himself, flying each year between Greece and the land of endless day. Their path across the northern sky was the invisible bridge that joined two worlds, the realm of the gods and the realm of men. Each spring, when Apollo returned from Hyperborea, the Greeks noticed flocks of migrating swans appearing over the Aegean. Their arrival coincided with the opening of the Delphic oracle and the festivals of light. Ancient priests interpreted their flight as the gods' herald signs that the divine sun had crossed the sky and was returning south. Pindar described them in a single calm line: the swans sing before the god as he journeys from the north. This was not poetry to his audience. It was observation dressed in reverence. The seasonal movement of birds had become a celestial procession. In the mythic geography of the world, the swans were the only creatures able to cross the northern boundary. Herodotus wrote that the Hyperboreans lived beyond the land of the north wind, and that their offerings travelled wrapped in wheat straw, passed hand to hand through the tribes of the world. The final stage, he said, was carried by swans to the island of Delos, where Apollo was born. The birds became literal couriers between continents, their migration path imagined as a sacred corridor stretching from the polar lands to the centre of the Mediterranean faith. The symbolism deepened as Greek astronomy evolved. The constellation Cygnus, shaped like a great swan flying along the Milky Way, was associated with this same journey. To ancient stargazers, the Milky Way itself was the celestial reflection of the Bridge of Swans, a luminous band connecting the northern and southern skies. When Apollo's sun dipped below the horizon in winter, Cygnus rose, gliding across the heavens as if marking his hidden path home. This mirrored geography between stars and earth gave the myth its lasting power. Every winter, the god and his birds vanished into the same light. Later, Roman poets kept the image, but gave it a quieter meaning. Ovid wrote that the swans follow the god's golden car, singing above the chill rivers of the north. Virgil, describing the same birds in the Georgics, said they move between worlds, carrying warmth to the cold. To him, their motion symbolized renewal, the promise that light always returns from the place of its absence. By the 1st century BCE, the Bridge of Swans had become both a natural observation and a philosophical lesson. Even in separation, there is connection. Even in darkness, migration continues. In Northern Europe, similar images appeared long before the Classical Age. In Finnish and Sami folklore, swans are souls of the dead, travelling along the river that divides the living from the afterworld. They guard the gateway to Tuonela, the realm of silence. In the Kalevala, the swan of Tuonela floats on black waters, its wings bright against the dusk, a vision not of death, but of transition. The bird does not fly away, it circles endlessly, keeping the border intact. This mirrored the Greek image of endless motion around the pole, where the sun itself circles without setting. The connection between birds and direction survives in Siberian myth as well. Among the Yakut, the soul's journey after death is guided by a white bird flying north. The Chukchi tell of the sky swans, who descend in winter to carry messages from the spirits of the upper world. Each spring, when the tundra begins to thaw, real swans arrive from the south, the whooper swans of Eurasia, following a migration path that stretches over thousands of kilometers to the Arctic rivers. Their precise return each year would have been among the most reliable signs of seasonal change, the natural proof that a living bridge truly existed between lands of night and lands of day. When early explorers of the 18th and 19th centuries entered the Arctic, they too recorded this sight. William Scoresby, sailing in 1823, described great flocks of white birds travelling northward in long, even ranks, as if along an invisible road. He noted their orientation with the sun and remarked that they rise as the light lengthens, as though answering a call. His words, factual and plain, could have been written in any age. The bridge was no longer myth, but the enduring pattern of migration that had inspired it. In Hermetic and Theosophical writings, the Bridge of Swans took on a symbolic role once more. Helena Blavatsky referred to it as the luminous path of return, linking the material and the spiritual worlds. To her, Hyperborea represented the higher realm of mind, and the birds were messengers of consciousness descending into matter. Each migration, the departure and return, was a cycle of incarnation. The same idea appears in later occult diagrams, where the Milky Way is labelled via Cygnus, the road of the swan, the path the soul follows between light and shadow. Even in modern science, the Arctic's migratory routes maintain the shape of that ancient symbol. Satellite tracking shows that whooper and tundra swans follow precise corridors stretching from the Baltic to the Yamal Peninsula, then on to the Lena Delta and the Chukchi Sea. Their flight paths, when mapped, converge into a wide arc that curves toward the pole the same direction that old maps reserved for Hyperborea. From the air, it would look like a silver thread drawn across the tundra, connecting continents in one continuous motion. The ancients could not have known these details, yet their intuition remains strangely accurate. They saw that the earth breathes through repetition, that birds, winds, and even gods follow returning paths. The Bridge of Swans was their way of expressing a truth visible but not explainable. The world's rhythms are continuous, and what departs always finds its way back. Today, when those same swans rise over the Arctic plains, their wings catch the pale light of a sun that circles without setting. To watch them is to see movement within stillness, a reflection of everything Hyperborea meant. It was never only a place. It was the passage itself, silent and recurring, written in the sky by the flight of white wings returning home. The cartographers of the Hollow North, by the time the Renaissance began to redraw the known world, the pole was no longer a blank space. It was a secret waiting to be mapped. Scholars and explorers filled its whiteness with conjecture circles, channels, and the faint outline of a world hidden beneath the ice. Hyperborea had moved from poetry into geometry, from myth into the coordinates of maps. Those who studied the heavens now turned their compasses northward, certain that at the top of the earth there lay an opening, a current, or a mountain that joined the outer world to the inner one. Gerardus Mercator was the first to give this vision form. In 1569, his world map introduced a projection that could show the entire planet at once, though it distorted its poles. To correct that distortion, he drew another, a circular chart published in 1595, Septentrionalium Terrarum Descriptio. It showed the Arctic divided into 4 islands by rivers, at whose centre rose Rups Nigra, the black rock. Beneath the rock, Mercator wrote in Latin, "Here the waters fall inward, and are swallowed into the earth." His source, he said, was the Inventio Fortunata, the lost chronicle of a 14th century monk who had supposedly reached the pole and recorded its geography. To Mercator, the polar mountain was no allegory. It was the world's axis, the place where the magnetic forces that guide the compass originated. In his letter to Queen Elizabeth's advisor John Dee, dated 1577, he explained that the rock draws iron as a lodestone, and the sea rushes round it as into a drain. Dee, mathematician and mystic, found in this a profound pattern. He believed the earth was not solid, but layered, each sphere turning within another. The polar opening was, to him, the mouth of creation, the entrance through which divine energy flowed. A century later, the Jesuit polymath Athanasius Kircher expanded this idea. In his Mundus Subterraneus of 1659, he proposed that the planet was riddled with tunnels connecting its oceans, mountains, and volcanoes. His cross-section diagrams showed whirlpools at the poles feeding these channels, balanced by vents at the equator. Kircher's engravings, ornate and strangely precise, were the first scientific-looking maps of a hollow Earth. They made the myth seem mechanical. The polar openings of Hyperborea had become the planet's arteries. When Isaac Newton described gravity in the late 17th century, he imagined Earth's shape not as a perfect sphere, but as an oblate spheroid flattened at the poles. This slight compression inspired new speculation. If the poles were lower, could they open inward? In 1692, Edmund Halley, astronomer and later discoverer of the comet that bears his name, published a paper proposing that the Earth consisted of concentric shells separated by luminous atmospheres. He suggested that the aurora borealis, the northern lights, might be rays escaping from the inner world through polar holes. Halley's reasoning was physical, yet it echoed Mercator's drawings almost exactly. In Halley's model, each inner sphere was habitable and illuminated by its own sun. He wrote that, from these cavities, the magnetic force proceeds, thus uniting astronomy and magnetism under one polar mystery. To his contemporaries, this was bold but plausible. The Arctic remained unexplored. Anything could lie beyond the ice. Even the Royal Society entertained his hypothesis, though it could not be tested. The map of the North became the boundary between knowledge and imagination, a circle that no ship had yet crossed. Through the 18th century, new explorers tried. The British Navy sent successive expeditions, Parry in 1819, Ross in 1829, Franklin in 1845, each seeking the Northwest Passage, each reporting strange phenomena, shifting compass bearings, mirages of open seas, pillars of light above the horizon. These accounts fed the belief that the pole concealed something vast and warm. In 1818, the American explorer John Cleves Sims Jr. went further, declaring publicly that the Earth was hollow with openings at both poles. He petitioned Congress to fund an expedition to the interior world. His circular pamphlets, showing a globe with 2 gaping entrances, became a curious mixture of science and scripture. He called the inner lands Paradise Restored. Sims's theories found followers. In 1829, Jeremiah Reynolds addressed the U.S. House of Representatives, arguing for a polar voyage. His speech, printed in major newspapers, claimed that ancient myths from Hyperborea to Mount Meru referred to the same northern opening. Though the government declined, the idea endured. By the time Jules Verne wrote Journey to the Centre of the Earth in 1864, the image of a hollow globe entered popular imagination permanently. In Germany, Karl Franz Heinrich Herbiger later transformed these ideas into his Weltallehre, the world ice theory. Published in 1913, it proposed that the cosmos itself was governed by ice, and that the poles were gates through which new worlds emerged. His followers in the early 20th century reinterpreted Hyperborea as the cradle of an ancient polar civilization, the source of humankind before continental drift and climate change buried it under frost. Their maps showed the pole as both birthplace and tomb, the first continent lost not to water but to silence. Modern science would slowly strip away the mythology. By 1909, Robert Peary claimed to have reached the geographic North Pole, finding only ice and shifting floes. In 1926, Roald Amundsen flew over it, confirming the absence of land. Yet the image of the hollow North persisted in unexpected places. During the mid-20th century, fringe writers spoke again of openings visible from satellites, of warm air currents rising through cracks in the ice. Photographs of circular cloud patterns above the Arctic were interpreted as proof of a hidden vortex. The myth had adapted to new technology. Every telescope and camera only replaced the mapmaker's ink. Even today, the language of cartography echoes that legacy. We still speak of north as orientation, of magnetic poles that wander, of invisible lines that circle the planet and converge at a point no one can see. The cartographers of the Hollow North did not merely draw geography, they gave shape to uncertainty. Their maps turned absence into structure, leaving a record of how human thought fills the unknown with order. In the archives of Antwerp, a small copy of Mercator's polar map survives, its parchment darkened with age. At its centre, the inked mountain stands surrounded by swirling rivers, labelled simply, "Here stands the magnetic rock, and here the waters fall into the earth." Around it stretch uncharted seas, left blank. In that emptiness lies the enduring appeal of Hyperborea, the conviction that at the limits of knowledge, the world turns inward, and that somewhere beneath the ice, the map continues. The Aurora Gate. In the polar night, when the sun has vanished for months, and the horizon is a frozen line between black sea and white sky, light returns not from the east, but from above. Curtains of green, violet, and red shimmer in silence, rising and collapsing like breath. To the ancients, this was not light at all, it was presence. The aurora was the visible sign of a border, the luminous veil that divided the world of men from the hidden realm beyond. Those who believed in Hyperborea saw in it the proof of an entrance. The Gate of the North. The first written account of the Northern Lights comes from Greek and Roman authors who had never seen them. Aristotle, in Meteorologica, wrote vaguely of burning vapours in the upper air and moving fires in the sky. Seneca, a century later, called them chasmata caeli cracks in the heavens through which the hidden fire of the world escaped. Pliny the Elder, in the 1st century CE, described them more clearly. At the extreme north, the sky burns at night, as though dawn were always rising. He believed these lights were reflections of the sun beyond the world's curve. His words echo a sense already ancient that the farthest north was not dark, but lit by a second, secret dawn. Among northern peoples, the aurora was never mere spectacle. The Inuit called it aksanit, the playing spirits. The Sami of Lapland believed it was the energy of departed souls, and that whistling at the lights would draw them closer, sometimes dangerously so. The Norse sagas named it Bifrost, the shimmering bridge that connected Midgard to Asgard. Though later scholars interpreted Bifrost as a rainbow, older Icelandic sources describe it as visible by night, flickering across the winter sky more like the aurora than any storm of rain. In both imagery and function, it was a gate, a pathway of colour through which gods and souls could cross. In Siberia, the Yakut and Evenki tribes told of a luminous cloud that opened when the world's spirit breathed. Hunters travelling by night would stop and bow when the air began to glow, for it meant that the sky mouth was moving, The Chukchi called it the Whispering Veil. They said it marked the edge of the upper land, the place where birds and spirits entered the world each spring. Their shamans wore silver discs on their clothing to mirror the aurora's movement, believing the reflection allowed safe passage through dream or death. Greek writers connected the northern light to the myth of Hyperborea through Apollo himself. The god's chariot was said to vanish into the sky at the end of his annual journey, crossing the bridge of air back to the land beyond the wind. Later, commentators described the aurora as the glow of his return. When Diodorus Siculus wrote that the moon appears very near to the earth in the island sacred to Apollo, some took it to mean that the polar light rising behind the horizon was mistaken for a low-hanging moon. The resemblance between these descriptions and the aurora's pale arcs is unmistakable. Medieval observers treated the phenomenon with reverence and fear. In 1230, the Chronicle of Matthew Paris records that fiery dragons were seen in the northern sky, curling and moving with terrible speed. In 1361, a monk from Mainz wrote of a red city floating above the sea, its towers flickering. To those who still believed in the northern paradise, these lights were windows through which the invisible land briefly revealed itself. The Rupes Nigra of Mercator's maps, the black magnetic mountain, was thought to lie beneath the brightest region of the aurora. The shimmering sky above it was the reflection of its hidden fire. By the 17th century, natural philosophers began to study the lights as part of Earth's physical processes. Galileo Galilei, who coined the term aurora borealis in 1619, believed it to be sunlight reflected from the upper atmosphere. Others, like René Descartes, thought it resulted from icy particles refracting the rays of the sun. Yet even as science grew, the imagery of the gate remained. The aurora was still described as an opening, a breathing of the firmament, or a veil lifted from the pole. In 1732, the Swedish explorer Anders Celsius, the same who later gave his name to the temperature scale, observed the aurora from Lapland. He recorded that compass needles swayed as the lights intensified, and that a faint rustling sound seemed to accompany their brightest moments. To him, this suggested magnetism, a hidden current linking the heavens and the earth. The idea that the aurora was an electrical manifestation took shape slowly until the 19th century experiments of Christian Birkeland confirmed it. Charged solar particles channeled by magnetic fields into the polar atmosphere. In his notes, Birkeland compared the auroral oval to a doorway through which energy from the sun enters the earth as light. That phrase, enters the earth, returned the concept full circle. The scientific model described what the myth had long implied, an influx of invisible power descending through the northern sky, lighting the world from within. To the old poets, this had been divine breath. To the physicists, solar wind. The form changed, but the pattern endured, light descending through the gate of the north. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, polar explorers often described the aurora in language still touched by myth. Fridtjof Nansen wrote during his Fram expedition of 1895. The heavens open and close as if breathing, and one feels that the earth herself is alive. Admiral Richard Byrd, who flew over the Arctic in 1926, said of the lights, "They move like veils across the threshold of another world." In their diaries, the vocabulary of scientists and the imagery of mystics became indistinguishable. In certain moments, the aurora truly behaves like a gate. When magnetic storms peak, the lights expand southward, covering half the hemisphere. The Earth's magnetic field lines, normally invisible, flare into visible form luminous corridors curving toward the pole. Instruments record electrical surges that ripple through the atmosphere, sometimes audible as faint clicks or hisses. The air itself becomes a medium of passage, glowing and trembling, echoing the oldest stories of a veil that hums when open. Even now, in the era of satellites, astronauts watching from orbit describe the aurora as a ring of fire surrounding the pole. They see it not as a curtain, but as a circle, a living boundary where the solar and terrestrial worlds meet. It is a border, moving and breathing, through which energy continuously enters. In that sense, Hyperborea was not wrong. There is a gate at the top of the world, luminous and alive, opening and closing with the rhythm of the sun. To ancient eyes, that glow was the reflection of divine return. To modern ones, it is the trace of particles spiraling through invisible fields. Yet both see the same truth, that in the stillness of the Arctic sky, light falls into the earth, and the heavens remain in motion. The sleep of the gods. At the northern edge of the world, where the maps end and only light remains, the ancients said the gods once walked beside men. They built their halls beneath a sun that never set, and their voices carried across the white air like the sound of wind through stone. When the earth turned and the ages shifted, they departed quietly, leaving no ruins, no graves, only silence. The name of that land, Hyperborea, was their final trace. In every account, the ending is the same. The Greeks wrote that when the world grew heavy, Apollo left the south and returned to the north, to rest among the unaging. Pindar imagined him not as fleeing, but as sleeping, his light folded beneath the horizon, his chariot standing still. The Norse said that the gods too would sleep when the long winter came, waiting for the rebirth of sun and song. The Vedas spoke of a hidden dawn that would one day return from the pole, bringing back memory. Across continents and languages, the pattern is identical: a withdrawal into stillness, a rest before awakening. The silence that follows great light is not absence, it is preservation. In the legends of the Hyperboreans, the people of the north did not die. They lay down beneath the snow, unchanging. Their breath became the wind, their voices the faint hum that travellers sometimes hear in the cold, a low resonance that seems to come from the earth itself. Herodotus called them a race who hides themselves and returns with the sun. He believed they still existed, unseen, beyond the last mountain chain, living through cycles longer than those of men. When explorers reached the Arctic centuries later, they found no shining cities, no unmelting gardens, only vast quiet. Yet many wrote of the same impression that the place was not empty, only paused. In 1896, Fridtjof Nansen recorded in his journal, "It feels as though the world itself were listening." He stood on a ship trapped in ice, watching faint arcs of aurora ripple over the horizon. To him, the light seemed ancient, a pulse, older than the planet's own breath. In his solitude, he wrote that the Arctic remembers something. Modern physics would describe it differently: magnetic fields, charged particles, the movement of energy through invisible lines. But the effect remains what the ancients knew: a rhythm too slow for the human eye, a rotation measured not in hours but in ages. The earth turns and its poles drift. Continents sink, seas rise, climates invert. What was once fertile becomes frozen. The people who lived under a constant sun would have seen their sky change first, the circle of daylight shrinking, the horizon lowering, warmth departing in silence. They would have watched the world tilt until their home passed into night. To those who remained, it would have seemed that the gods themselves had withdrawn. In the late 19th century, the Arctic explorer Knud Rasmussen recorded a Greenlandic story about a people who walked north into the light and were not seen again. They were not dead, the story said, but sleeping beneath the ice, waiting for the great warmth to return. The motif recurs across distant mythologies. Sleeping kings, hidden cities, timeless watchers beneath mountains. The Hyperborean version is colder, quieter, a civilization turned inward, folded under the frost, dreaming through millennia. When the first satellites began to photograph the Earth from space, The pole appeared as a circle of white cloud and shadow, endless motion around a center no one could see. Scientists later discovered that the magnetic field itself moves wandering slowly across the polar regions, never still. Its drift leaves traces in stone, in the frozen iron of seabeds, encompasses that age into inaccuracy. The world keeps a memory of direction, yet never holds one for long. Perhaps this movement is what the ancients called the return of Apollo, the unseen rotation of light beneath the ice. The idea that the gods are not gone but asleep is older than writing. In Hesiod's fragments, the golden race did not vanish but passed beneath the earth, guardians unseen. In Plato's Statesman, the universe alternates between divine rule and self-motion epochs of guidance, followed by silence. Each turn of the cosmic axis brings one closer to the other. To the philosophers of Alexandria, Hyperborea became a symbol of this inversion, the point where heaven and earth exchange places, where gods sleep and men awaken. If there is a truth inside the myth, it may lie not in geography, but in perception. The farther north one travels, the more time dissolves. Day becomes year, horizon becomes circle. The world ceases to have direction. Under such conditions, it is easy to imagine eternity, a realm where movement and stillness are the same. For those who stood there thousands of years ago, surrounded by light that never set, the sense of immortality must have been natural. When the ice came and that light faded, they would have felt not destruction, but sleep. In 1906, the Norwegian writer Hans E. Kink described standing beneath the aurora. It was as if the air remembered speech, but could not speak. His words could have been written in any century. The Hyperborean world, whether real or imagined, endures in that same silence, a place that listens, waiting for its own sound to return. So the story ends where it began, with light circling above a frozen sea, with names fading into air. The gods did not die. They reclined into the horizon, beneath a sun that never truly leaves, beneath an ice that never fully holds. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of maps or years, Hyperborea continues not as land, nor as legend, but as the long, patient sleep of the gods. The light fades, but never fully leaves. The ancients said the gods only slept, that beneath the ice the world still breathes, waiting for warmth to return. Perhaps that's what Hyperborea truly was, not a place, but a memory that keeps moving in silence. If you've reached this far, take a moment to let it settle. The past has not vanished. It only waits beneath the surface, quiet as snow. Thank you for traveling with us tonight. If these forgotten worlds speak to you, subscribe, leave a light for the next traveler, and return whenever you wish to drift through time again. Until then, sleep well beneath the northern sky.